Welcome to the Atomic Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Osborn, and on this podcast, we interview successful business owners for them to share atomic, impactful lessons that they've learned throughout their business career and share them with us. As always, this show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, the new way to close deals that doesn't rely on any of the old traditional methods that everybody hates. We use this method with 26 qualified leads and sales calls in 10 days without any ad spend, outreach, or social media posting that everybody hates doing. To find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn to have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborn. And the link to that will be in the show notes below. But on today's show, our guest is Mark Layder. He's the owner of BizQonnect.com, providing network strategy in all things new biz paradigm. So, Mark, welcome to the show. And I want to start off with asking you what I always love to start off asking, which is this. If you were able to go back somehow into time when you started your very first business, what's the number one piece of advice that you would give yourself?
Wow. Well, good to be on the session, he says, buying some time to think about that question. What would I say going back? I would probably say if we focus more on structure, then almost anything is doable. Because my nature, particularly back in the day, I'm the sales guy that charges off and I could get in anywhere. But if there wasn't the thing behind what I got into, then for me personally, beyond when I was selling for other people, it led to kind of, you could do the front end, but if there wasn't the back end, you got some results, but you didn't maximize your results. So I think it's beware the convert, as my mother would have said when she still had her marbles. She's a bit old now, so she's not quite full ticket, but still in the game. But she would have said, beware the convert. And for somebody like me, who's not a structured person, really, I guess I've realized through experience, structure wins today. It's not a skills problem that people are struggling with. The skills are out there. The tools are out there. I think it's if you get the structure right, then you massively move the needle in favor of you winning compared to the, I guess, wing it method that a lot of people have sort of brought up on.
Yeah, yeah. When you talk about structure, can you go into a little bit more context and depth around that? Like, what sort of structure do you see has helped businesses, or maybe even helped yours? That if you were to go back and tell your younger self, like, what sort of structures do you think are really helpful in growing a business?
Well, as we speak, because that you took me back in quite a few years over that period. If you kind of speeded that up to today, the thing that I started saying, that not for any clever reasons, it was just something that I believed and was coming out in conversations, that people largely set up businesses today because they have an idea, or they see a little gap in the market, and lines like, yeah, there may be a gap in the market, but is there a market in the gap? And that takes you somewhere. But what we see pretty much universally is we would see business owners that have already, they're 2 years in or whatever, typically, or they might be even earlier, but kind of the business dream, it may not be the nightmare yet, but it's not what they expected. And the main thing I tend to follow is where they spend, because they're not investing their time. And you quickly get them to, how much of your time are you able to invest in the things that you most love and wanted to do about the business? And the headline answer to that is about 20%, because the other 80% is dealing with payrolls and dealing with problems and dealing with all this stuff that can really be done by other people. And so just by having them acknowledge and looking at the lines I was saying to other people before they were clients, well, did you design the business around your skills and passions? And you get a pause at that point, and ultimate answer is no. And you go, Well, that's the fault that we've all been taught to hardwire in. So it's going back and rectifying that fault. That's the first domino. I'm sure I'm mixing my metaphors, but that's the first domino that kind of people start to go from position in business to right. I wish
Mm,
somebody told me that years ago, because then they can get other people to do the bits of business that it's not so much they don't want to do. Typically, they're not good at either, but they've got to be done in a business. So it comes down to the very granular micro stuff that I hate of
mm,
you get that stuff done in that boulders jar exercise. If you put if that's the first boulder, because if you don't put it in, you're going to spend the rest of your life in business digging all the other stuff to try and get it in retrospectively, and that's a lot harder, and you may never
mm.
do it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's great. I think structure is one of those things that when you start, you don't fully appreciate and often have to, as you say, kind of dig things out to recreate that structure so that you've got a more stable foundation to build upon for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really good. When looking at that whole structure element, one of the things that I like to ask is if you were to look back at your time in business, what's the biggest challenge that you've ever faced, and what's the learning that you've had from that?
um Biggest challenge and biggest learning. um the one that comes to mind, I think, is, and it may be because, again, we stumbled into this to solve it for other people years later. But going back to my first proper business, I had little side gig MLM things back in the early 80s, but a proper business, with employees and blah, blah, blah.
Mm,
I think today now, the biggest problem, and we see it a lot, is when it comes to forming not kind of JV partners, but really the internal co-founder type. And it's another one of those bad seeds, I think, putting it in that sense, because very commonly we'll see two people in a business and 100% of the shares divided by two is 50-50 each. And we have, I don't know how many it is, it's not hundreds, but it could be in the dozens of unpicking badly structured deals between co-owners, because 6 months later, one of them's doing 90% of the work and they've got a director loan of 50,000 in the business. The other one wants a salary but isn't working full time, and it's so not 50-50, and
mm,
that will fracture. And I think it's, for my personal learning lesson was, we had a good business back in 87 to 90, $1.5 million in those days was, I don't know how we did it, but we did it.
mm,
But my partner, after the fact, he's probably a sociopath, but that's an extreme version. The business version is being really careful in those first 6 months for founders of, we've kind of now, because new business paradigm stuff is, how do we create relationships with people we think we want to work with, but don't necessarily hitch at the hip straight away. So
mm.
there's lots of structures and lots of informal structures that let people work together for 6 months and keep records of who's doing the work and who's good at this, and get that
Yeah,
experience first, because A, you'll have the knowledge of working together, and B, you'll have the records to when you do need contracts and share allocations. And so I think it's this whole area of being sure who you get into bed with, because and some people think I personally think it's great to get into business with friends. People would say, dangerous, you end up losing a friend and a business. Personally, I think that can be offset if you look at the structure correctly. I get the concern, but it's
mm,
that whole area again of, we tend to wing this. And the convert in me says, and I did wing things, and my nature is wing things because I'm sales orientated. So I can do that piece, but
Yeah.
it will come back to bite you. And the stats
Mm,
back that up massively. If we've got,
mm,
75% plus or minus failure rate in both the US and the UK in less than 5 years, at a time when it's never been easier to set up business, and there's tools and all of these things, and you and I are talking now for free. If you were back in your home country, it'd still be free. It used to be, like a steam mechanism to get a phone call that cost you your mortgage, never mind free. So it's easier, but the results don't bear that out.
mm. Yeah. No, I think, all of that is just really imperative to business and understanding. Just everything you said there, I think is fantastic. It's interesting that as we go through those process changes, um, how it impacts our whole way on the way that we do business and how we show up and the way that we do things, which is, yeah, I love what you're saying there, Mark. If you look over the next, say, 2 to 3 years of your business, what are you wanting to achieve? What's your goals?
Well, again, sort of linked to the questions you've already asked and what we've already chatted about. One, in this case, me, does different things at different stages of just by age or just by stage of life or knowledge and experience, I guess. So, there's things that I wouldn't do now that I would have done in my 30s. There was things that, the risks I took when it was just me and my wife, because she opted in and bought the deal with the lunatic Scouser Liverpudlian. And so she was in that, warts and all. But when our son came along, he did, I don't know where he came from. But did he actively choose us? But, that even affected the way I drove the car, having a son. So the risk profile changes, I guess, is one sub point. But the main point now is I wanted to get to a point where I was able to kind of invest in the broadest terms, and particularly time, in this whole new business paradigm area. Because the more I had sort of research-based conversations about why is the coaching industry still so fragmented after, it's been there now 30 years or more. It's still hideously fragmented. So that industry that I was around for a long time was one good case study. And then obviously the broader business owner type area. So we've now designed a structure that really is about research into the structures, back to that word again, that the number one thing we've got to change, in our humble view, and the research is backing it up, is the way we create the working environment, whether that's the organizational structure. And so what we call umbrella companies, which is kind of self-employed people, but under an umbrella that organizes, and it means they're part of teams and stuff. So the way lawyers work in chambers, not many people know barristers in this country are self-employed, but they work through chambers because they've got to have that infrastructure for all of the legalities of what they do. So that's almost, to us, the organization solution of the future for most people. So we want to be able to research and get information out about how to make these changes, because it's almost summarized by, and people responded to it, people seem to know plan A isn't working. So it's kind of I either know I need a plan B, or I'm just ready to explore a plan B. All our work is kind of plan B, different approaches to today's problems that the old solutions aren't working on. So I want to be involved in creating a central point. Quallywood, I can tell you the background on that story if you want, but Quallywood became affectionately known as a place to come to and get information, not pitches, relationships, where people could get support, advice, whatever it is, and that creates a community that does business in, they're not actually their old ways. It's kind of getting through all of this stuff we've got in the way today to get back to simple relationship ways of doing business. So new business paradigm, Qualywood, all that kind of, there are new old ways that make business easy, and somehow business is perceived as being very hard, which is causing a lot of damage and destroying the confidence of going into it. And both the US and the UK and other developed countries, they need new waves. So we see this as a new way to drive things forward.
It's amazing. Good. I love it. I love it. Well, Mark, for people that are wanting to learn a little bit more about what you do and get in contact you with us, what's the best way for them to do that?
The easiest way is either to come and get involved in the conversation on LinkedIn, where we put out, we're testing it now, but all kinds of interesting stuff, because we're just trying to open people to the conversation. So we call it MyJack. Marketing is just a conversation, is the mnemonic thing. So LinkedIn, and the my thing after the linkedin.com bit is Qualywood. Just take out the H and put a Q in, Qualywood, and you'll get to me on there. Mark Layder, it finds you under my name as well. And then obviously the BizQonnect.com that you put out, which is the Biz, B-I-Z with a Q, Quonnect.com. They're the easiest places to get either the conversation going or go check out other stuff in the past.
Amazing, amazing. Well, I recommend everyone go check out Mark on the places he just said for sure. And Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. Yeah, it's great having you here. And as a reminder to everyone, this show is sponsored by the LinkedIn Reverse Podcast Method, the new way to close deals that doesn't rely on any of the old traditional methods that everyone hates. To find out more, direct message me on LinkedIn to have a chat. That's Jason A. Osborn. And the link to that will be in the show notes below. Until next episode, stay inspired.